And now I am very excited to welcome back Josh Nunn from the Action Network and Covers.com to talk some college football. You can follow Josh on Twitter at StepOnADuck1. Josh, thanks again for coming back on the show. I mean, it's so funny. It's like you texted me last week, and I was like, man, I think it's time to talk some college football, my man. How you been?
I've been really good, Kiev. Thanks for having me on the show today. Man, it's just it's crazy how much waiting time we have to do year in and year out for college football. We're only halfway through, but the season's just about 100 short days away. And so we're getting fully in the swing of off-season prep and trying to keep it all together to find some value in the early markets. And the season will be here before we know it. So it's definitely, I felt that itch for college football as we get into summer.
Oh man, me too. And there was a lot going on, obviously, earlier in the spring. I'm big into college basketball. I'm still kind of just following college football around a little bit. It's like we're both on X, and so we follow a lot of the same people. And but I think over the last 10 days or so is when I was really able to dig in, Josh. And I hope your spring's going well out in North Carolina. I'm assuming that the weather has turned for you.
Definitely has turned. We've had a streak of days here in the 80s. I live right by the beach, so I'm there multiple times a week. And yep, it's a great time of year to be outside and definitely take full advantage of being on the coast.
Absolutely. Well, that sounds beautiful, man. And for us, it's pretty good right now. But once summer hits, it's going up in the mountains for me.
For sure.
So, I guess that should lead me into my first question for you. When do you, who is a specialist in college football, when do you really start digging in and learning about these teams and start attacking those early markets?
Yeah, it's been interesting because of the changing dynamic with multiple different portal windows. I've actually had to pivot a little bit in my off-season prep timeframe start. I used to always start about April 1st, but I actually started my prep this season about the third week of February. I wanted to just get some notes shored up before teams started spring practice with the first portal window closing. And so I did a little bit of work at that time, just assessing some coaching and coordinator changes and just trying to put together what these teams' rosters were going to look like. We only had one team that had a spring game in March, and that was Liberty. And the rest of them kicked off about April 5th, 12th, and so on and so forth. So I did a little snippet of work about the third week of February, but the majority of the work started for me about April 1st or thereabouts, and then has really ramped up since that second portal window has closed as of April 25th.
All right, that's great, and that's nice how you got ahead of things so early. I might have tailed you in a couple tweets that you had out there, my man. I love it. Love hearing the stuff nice and early, and always get agreement from me, which is good for me and hopefully good for you. So I love aligning up with you, and we'll see if we align today, because what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the conferences here. Maybe if you made a bet or two, we'll talk about it if you're able to release it, and maybe a little Heisman here at the end. So real excited to get into it. But starting with the Power Four, I want to look at it probably in order: ACC, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12 are the main ones. We'll probably start with the ACC, but before that, even there's some rule changes, my man. There's some rule changes in college football, which I find pretty interesting, especially the main one, which I'll get into. I find it funny that this year, there's an injury rule. Did you get a chance to look in that what's going to happen to teams if they run out of timeouts?
I did. I think it's an interesting change, and I think the spirit behind the change from the memo that I read directly from NCAA.org was also very interesting, in that they thought that the faking of injuries and the on-field injury situations were really creating havoc for the product on the field, and it was really disruptive to play. So I like the fact that teams will be forced into a timeout. If teams do not have a timeout, they'll be assessed a 5-yard penalty. And I think that on the field penalty will prohibit some of this from occurring. Now, teams will certainly have players that are legitimately injured, but I think the flopping and the grabbing at the calf and some of that stuff where you see a coach signal for a player to go down to curb tempo and momentum drives, I think that will really stop, and I think it's a positive change.
Absolutely. And here's the rule exactly. If the team does not have any timeouts remaining, a 5-yard delay of game penalty will be assessed. Now, here's the bad part of this rule. You're trying to fight. You're trying to win. A guy has a serious injury. He's down. There's no timeouts. Is this guy's just going to drag him off the field like a rag doll, further injuring him, possibly worse, as his knee's hanging there just to get this play call in? And I almost think that's got to be a penalty too, because you can't stop a real injury, but now it's like coaches have to save a timeout maybe for that circumstance itself, Josh.
I definitely think you'll find that the way that coaches are adjudicating their timeouts and the way that the assessment of when to call timeouts or to save a timeout, that will certainly be a strategy that'll have to be deployed that we haven't really had to see before, especially in situations on defense where you're calling your timeouts to preserve time. It'll be interesting to see if if the chamber gets emptied and they use all three, or if they do try to save one for that circumstance.
It is. And I wonder if they should add an extra, small 30-second timeout or something because of this, because there's real injuries that's going to happen, which means real stoppages, and they're going to have to blow some timeouts for it. But now you have to wonder if there's enough timeouts to go around. So that's my two questions. What are they going to do for a real injury, and what are they going to do if the timeouts are just not quite enough per game because of it? So I find that interesting. But Josh, I'm not going to lie, I like their forward thinking. I think it's right. I think the faking of injuries was horrible. It was bad on the eyes and it was bad on competition. So I'm glad that they did something. I just think it will have to evolve with some of the circumstances that I brought up here. Another interesting penalty another interesting rule change is that after the 2-minute timeout in either half, if the defense commits a foul with 12 or more players on the field and the players participate in the play, the officials will administer a 5-yard penalty. The offense, that's been like that, but the offense now has the option to reset the game clock back to the time it was at the start of play, which is awesome because you saw a couple of these sneaky coaches. I don't know if it was Dan Lanning. We saw it last year. I'm trying to remember the exact circumstances, but they literally purposely put 12 players on the field in order to drain the clock and have that competitive advantage, Josh.
Yeah, I remember it well. It was Ohio State at Oregon about middle of the season, and Ohio State was down and driving, and Oregon deployed 12 players. The clock had some time exhausted. They assessed a penalty for 12 players on the field, but they could not go back and recall the clock. So recalling the clock will also be an element that will likely curb that sort of gamesmanship from happening.
And that's another great thing because, I'm surprised it wasn't happening more than what we just saw there. It's not like there's a ton of examples that it could happen, but I've seen enough where I thought it could happen more. And credit to the keen coaches out there being ahead of the game analytically, like Lanning, and for doing it. And then obviously the NCAA seeing the error in the mistake that had to be changed. So I find that interesting. The other rule changes aren't so big of a deal. Is there another one that caught your eye? The kickoff returning team that makes a T signal with his arms during the kick. They give up their ability and right to make a return. I don't think that's anything too special, Josh.
We've seen a trend of that where one of the returners will stick their arms out and make a T signal, and that is now going to be deemed as they're surrendering their ability to advance the ball in the play for the entire team, which is fine. I saw another one out about some language that's going to be kind of standardized for referees regarding replay, which is also fine. I also saw that after the third overtime, teams will be allowed to call one more timeout for the duration of the game. So if you have multiple long overtimes, after the third overtime, you'll have one total team timeout for the remainder of the contest rather than a timeout per overtime session, which is a little bit different. And then really the last one was some coach-to-player communication in the headsets that are installed in the helmets of one player. That is going to be something that the FCS level will experiment with, as FBS has. So positive change there, I believe.
Yes, definitely a positive change for the FCS there. And what you said about the tee, I agree with, because they go like this and then they'll grab the ball, right? And it kind of fakes out the other team a little bit. If you're not getting the ball, you're not getting the ball. Let's not try to get it afterwards and make it look stupid. So I agree with that. And I like the upheld and overturned, because when they use the word confirmed, it's like, wait a minute, you just confirmed your stupidity. At least tell us that you don't have enough visual evidence, because it was just a bad, like, look, it's confirmed. It's like, you didn't confirm anything, buddy. Just say it's upheld or overturned. I think that's the correct move that they made right there. Now, I do want better replay, but I think that's something, we have to wait for in the future as technology progresses. But right now, the NFL's incorporating that replay from New York a little bit quicker as well. And they're adding a few layers to it, which I like to see myself. So good stuff. And that's probably all the time we should spend on rule changes, because we got a lot to talk about, baby. And the ACC, like I said earlier, is what we're going to start with here. Have you got the chance to look at the ACC, and do you have any general thoughts or anything on a team?
I do. I think that the ACC is going to be a more wide open league than what the betting menu reflects. I think that there's just this sentiment out there that Clemson is head and shoulders above everyone else. And then you've got Miami, Louisville, and SMU kind of in that second tier, all of which are losing some key elements of last year's team and are going to have to reload. I think they'll all be okay in the league when everything shakes out. But I definitely think the ACC is a little bit more wide open than the menu calls for. Clemson has been notorious year in and year out for not taking advantage of the transfer portal and not pivoting and adapting to the changing landscape. This year as well, they have 3 adds via the portal, which is by far the fewest in FBS without qualification there. So it'll be real interesting, because they've kind of hung their hat with Dabo on their culture, and the way that they have done things is the way that they do things. And I think that they'll be in the mix in the ACC as well. But the real interesting thing that I think is, if you really dive into these teams that are kind of in that second or third tier, kind of the fringe teams, with the way that these leagues are constructed, you're only playing 8 or 9 conference games, and you have teams that have unbalanced schedules. And so you really should dive into the conference slate and seeing where teams are playing teams. Are they hosting teams that might be ahead of them, or that could be perceived to be better than them, that are winnable games? Are the road games winnable? One team that I like is Georgia Tech. I think when you look at the slate for Georgia Tech, they certainly have an opportunity to run through that league. And they host Clemson in week 3. We'll see a lot about Georgia Tech and the intestinal fortitude that team is built with in week 3. And then the rest of their slate is very, very manageable. They avoid Miami, they avoid Louisville, they avoid SMU. So I think there's value in a team like Georgia Tech to take that next step. Brent Key is certainly building something there, and building it long-term, not a flash in the pan. So Georgia Tech is a team that I think will certainly have their say in what happens in that league this year.
Absolutely. You're speaking my language. We did discuss this. Georgia Tech in a great position. Last week we discussed it as well, as I gave that 14-1 to win the ACC last week. And I took over 7.5 as well on Georgia Tech. It's just a situation where you have a good quarterback in Haynes King, who freaking almost beat Georgia. And there were some serious problems with what people say the officials did that game. It's hard to let Georgia lose that at home. But, man, now you're going to have to give Georgia Tech some respect coming in. And they rank 11th in returning production, a massive high for them coming down in. And just avoiding Miami, Louisville, SMU, North Carolina, that could be good, Florida State, which, normally they're good, and Clemson at home. I think that is just a perfect case for them to get into the final game. And maybe they'll be dogs, but you got that 14-1 on your side here. to compete that. Now I'm kicking myself, Josh, because a week ago, their first game, they were only a 1.5 point favorite at Colorado. And I looked to bet it this week and they were up to 3.5. So I did miss out on the first game on the early line, unfortunately. I think the line will come back to 3. I do think that Colorado money on a first game like that, especially when they have Caden Salter, is gonna come in a little bit. So I'm not in a rush now to take that, but I do love what you said there, and I agree with you. Georgia Tech is the team to look at here in an interesting ACC. And I also think that a lot of people look at the Big Ten and the SEC. In my opinion, if you're going to look at some of the wilder markets out there that maybe have a chance for a Heisman or something, these are going to be overlooked conferences, even though they don't have as much necessary competition for some of these quarterbacks to really shine. So I think, you're going to find your best bets maybe in those smaller conferences, ACC, Big 12, when it comes to Power 4, and obviously the Group of 5. Let's move on to the Big 10 here. So I'm a Big 10 guy, so I'll start with that. I have to talk a little Badgers. Here's the thing with them. They did get a quarterback from Maryland and transferred Billy Edwards. And I do like Edwards. I watched Edwards enough last year. Not saying he's like Talia Tagovailoa or anything, but I thought he did a substantial job in such a hard Big Ten and very hard slate of games that they had to play on a hard schedule last year. I think he's going to be solid. But the problem with Wisconsin is not necessarily the fact that they're not going to get some decent players, and they have been trending down a little bit. But it's that schedule, man. That schedule is so bad this year, and I even wonder, like, I'm kicking myself, like thinking to myself a couple of years ago, I was like, yes, we get to play Alabama, yeah. And now just seeing how Wisconsin has performed over the last 2 or 3 years, I'm a little scared. I thought they were in a competition type situation with the bigger teams. Over the past 2 years, they haven't. And I'm trying to pull it up here, and I thought I had it, but I accidentally closed it. I'm gonna go over the Wisconsin Badgers 2025 schedule just to tell you why their season win total is 5.5. Well, they play Miami, Ohio. Now, I'm not saying that's a for sure win because they're actually probably one of the better MAC teams. I expect them to win that game. I expect them to be a 6 or 7 point favorite. But there is definitely a chance that Miami, Ohio roughs them up because Wisconsin doesn't come out the gates swinging. Middle Tennessee State's the next game. Let's just give them 2 wins there. Now you have at Alabama. You have home against Maryland, which I'm guessing that's going to be a win for the quarterback. And then you have 3 wins. But at Michigan, against a better Iowa team, against Ohio State, the best team in the nation, at Oregon, one of the top 5 teams in the nation, versus Washington with a good coach and Jed Fish, at Indiana, who made the playoffs last year, against Illinois at home, who's number 3 in returning production, with a pissed-off Brett Bielema, who's still got the Badgers chip on his shoulder, and then finally at Minnesota for the game for the Axe. I'm not so sure we find a 5th win there because I only see 3 right now, and maybe I give them Washington at home, maybe Iowa, but that just gets you to 5, man. This is a brutal schedule. I didn't take under 5.5. I'm just worried about the Badgers, Josh.
Yeah, and there's still a limited futures market for regular season wins for the G5 and the Power 5, to be honest with you. So you could wait for that market to open up a little bit. Maybe you find a 6 flat. But we already saw a MAC team go into Camp Randall last year and kind of push Wisconsin around last year when Western Michigan gave them everything they could handle and more. Miami of Ohio could certainly be capable of doing that. Now, Miami of Ohio traditionally kind of junks their non-conference as Coach Chuck Martin really focuses on MAC play. So they could get down early and kind of just pack it in. But Middle Tennessee, they should handle. That trip to Alabama is really tough. And then depending on what happens there, you have to double back for Maryland, who could be hungry for something there. But that 4-game stretch in the middle that you had mentioned, at Michigan, hosting Iowa, hosting Ohio State, and then at Oregon, man, that's murderer's row in the Big Ten. That's as tough as you're going to see a 4-game stretch for any team play this season. So could be really tough. We won't get it really in the weeds, but I see Wisconsin they've got position battles for 5 or 6 starting positions on the defense throughout all 3 levels of the defense. They're going to have to shore up the D line. They've got 2 new quarterbacks, and so it'll be real interesting if they decide on Billy Edwards or Danny O'Neill. Who's going to play left tackle? There's still some holes there that they're really going to have to shore up in fall camp to really try to solidify who's going to be the starting 22 on both sides of the ball, starting 11 on each side. Could be a real interesting season for Wisconsin.
Yeah, and what's funny is that Maryland, I penciled in a win. Well, that's right, between Alabama and Michigan, so it's just a bad spot for that too. It is nothing good here looking at their schedule. I will give you a bet that I made, Josh, and I took it at FanDuel yesterday. I took Oregon under 10.5 wins at -110, and I did it for a couple different reasons. Number one, were they undefeated last year? Absolutely. They did a great job, phenomenal job with that schedule. But rather than getting one of the big dogs at home like they had Ohio State, which was a coin flip game, they go to Penn State. And I'm not a big Allard fan, Drew Allard, but he is third for some reason in the Heisman odds, which I disagree with. But still, he's getting some respect there. And I do expect Penn State to win that game as a revenge spot from the Big Ten championship game last year. But here you go. So you have to lose another game. Well, there's a lot going against Oregon. As I mentioned, that coin flip game last year with Ohio State. Well, you remember they went to Wisconsin and they should have lost against a bad Badgers team last year. They should have lost in that Boise State game. There was no certainty that they were going to beat Boise State. It took 2 special teams touchdowns for this team. Now, another thing about Oregon is, obviously they have amazing recruits and they certainly have good transfers, but they also are changing their quarterback. And I'm sorry, man, but Dylan Gabriel is a lot more trustworthy than Brown coming in, right? And I think that just because of that massive change for a kid that was a 5-star recruit, he was at UCLA last year. It just makes it so much more variant that they dropped 2 games. Sorry, I said Brown. I meant Dante Moore. Right? I meant Dante Moore. My bad. So their schedule this year isn't exactly any massive gimmies. Even though they avoid Ohio State and Michigan, they still have to go to an Iowa team that's going to be hungry for a big win. They have to go to a Rutgers team that I think is going to surprise some people this year. I'm not saying they're going to be in the playoffs, but I'm going to say that Rutgers is definitely good because they return a ton of guys. Then they have to play at Washington for their final game, which could be a loss. They have USC before that. USC has been monster recruiting this year. And they get good old Indiana as well at home. They probably take care of, obviously, Montana State, Oklahoma State, and at Northwestern. Man, by the way, I love Montana State, man. The Cats. Oh, that was a wonderful championship game. I was really hoping they were going to win that game last year. But I just see another loss on there with Oregon with an unproven quarterback. And I took it because I only got -110 on it. And if you shop it around, you can find that number, Josh.
There's a lot that has to go right for a team when you're betting over 10.5. They're going to have to essentially run the table and be near perfect, and all cylinders are going to have to hit early. And there's just too many holes for me to want to do that, right? They're breaking in 3 new on the offensive line. They're putting a lot of trust in Dante Moore, something I didn't see at UCLA. I didn't see what I would have wanted to see necessarily. He did okay, but I didn't think, based on the hype that was surrounding him, that he had performed all that well. There's a few holes on defense. Oregon will be Oregon with their recruits, and they recruit at a high level, but there's just too much uncertain for me with the turnover in offensive production and shoring up the offensive line for me to want to take over 10.5. So I'm definitely not looking there. And then when you do look at the schedule, right, they're at Penn State. That's their 5th game in 5 weeks after the Civil War game against Oregon State. Yeah, they'll probably be focused on the game itself, but definitely a spot for Penn State to kind of maybe push them around a little bit and get a little payback for how that Big Ten championship game did end up going last year. And then tough road trips at Iowa. At Rutgers will not be an easy trip. That's one of the farthest trips that you can have in this league. USC could likely be improved. I mean, yeah, there's definitely some landmines on that schedule they're going to have to navigate. And the other interesting thing that we need to remember is now with the expanded 12-team playoff, there's no pressure to be perfect for these teams, right? We saw teams last year that were completely content with 2 losses and just getting in and giving themselves a shot. Ohio State was one of them, right? They didn't have a chance to make the Big Ten championship game. They had multiple losses. They still rallied the troops and won 4 games in 4 weeks and won the whole thing. So it was one of those things too, where you're not going to have that pressure and expectation for teams to have to be perfect in order to have a chance to win the national championship. So could play some of it too with some of these teams, not maybe necessarily with Oregon, but with some of these teams, that'll certainly come into play also.
Bill Connolly's returning production for the Oregon Ducks, one of the worst in Power 4 at 109th. And not, like I said, they recruit good and they get some transfers, but still, as far as continuity, definitely
Takes
Oregon
time.
takes a hit this year. Yeah. Anything on Big Ten before we move on?
I mean, it's looking more and more the Big Ten is like it's going to be a 3-headed monster race, like it seems to be every year, right? With Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon to win the league. But again, 16 teams are in the league, and there's an unbalanced schedule. And if you're looking for a fun future, there could be a team like Illinois or like Nebraska that can run through an unbalanced slate and jump up there and maybe have a say late in November as to what happens in that league. I'm not going to sit here confidently and say I think that Illinois or Nebraska is going to run the table and win the league, but those are teams that could certainly run off several wins in a row and put themselves in position to where they might have a say in what happens. So I don't have a future play or a regular season win play right now on any Big Ten teams, but definitely we'll push something across as we get later on into the summer, and I'll find some value somewhere, I believe. But I do like Oregon under 10.5.
Awesome. I noticed you didn't mention Michigan right there in the Big Three, so prepare for some texts later or some tweets at you after the show. Big Blue is not going to be happy with that. Let's move on to the SEC then, and this conference. Before I give you the floor, I just want to say, dude, I can make a case for like 6 to 8 teams. I mean, I can. Why don't you go ahead and take this one, and I'll clean up.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious favorites are going to be the usual suspects of Texas reloading with Arch Manning, and they've got some talent in the portal. Georgia moved on from Carson Beck, but they really like what they have returning. Alabama in year 2 under Kalen DeBoer should find better footing. They have a new offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, who's a familiar face with Kalen DeBoer. They've worked together at numerous stops. And there's a likely chance that team will be improved. But you really could make a case. I mean, there's teams like South Carolina, LSU, Ole Miss. All of those teams could have a say in what happens in the SEC this year. And this league, more than any, benefits from the NIL money that's pouring in and poaching talent from not only the other power leagues, but they're finding golden nuggets everywhere at the G5 level and beyond. This league is one that just gets richer and richer every season. I think there's a lot of depth in the SEC. One thing that I look to do and will look to do this season with the SEC is really try and maximize how they perform in the non-conference. I think there's going to be a lot of spreads that won't be high enough, and I think these teams will the SEC overall should have a very, very strong non-conference record, both straight up and against the number. But yeah, I mean, there's LSU, I think, is poised to rebound too. I think they had certainly had a down year, but they're gonna be one of those teams too that's right there in the mix with the SEC, I believe too.
Lay the points is what Josh was saying in the SEC non-conference. Yeah, I completely echo that sentiment, and I think it's a great way to look at it. And you're right, they have been getting stronger, man. It's going to be so fun to watch Lenora Sellers quarterbacking over at South Carolina. It's going to be so fun to finally see Archie Manning after we've been waiting these years here to take the helm. I think Archie's going to play 2 years at Texas. I don't think he's going to play 1 unless he wins that national championship. I think he plays a minimum of 2 years there. So I hope teams aren't not trying to tank for a guy like him because he's sticking around, in my opinion. I do want to mention one team I might fade. Their season win totals already pretty low at 5.5, but Arkansas is just a team that I think is on the wrong way. They're going the wrong way, and they didn't do that well on the on-3 transfer net ratings, and I look at a 247 and the on three because it kind of measures out a function between your NIL as well as what you're losing and what you're bringing in. So it's really interesting to look at those numbers, and they're not looking good there. Looking at their win total, I'm going to look into it a little bit more, but I'm not a big fan of what Arkansas has to do this year. So I'm interested. Thinking about Vanderbilt, looks like Dylan Pavia is going to play another year, and Diego Pavia. And it's funny. This kid is going to be playing college football. It feels like till he's retirement age in the NFL. I'm happy because I do like watching him, and I thought it was so fun last year when he beat Alabama because I was on Vanderbilt. That was just a blast to watch that game. And the kid's got tons of heart. He's not an NFL quarterback, but man, I'd love to see him extend his career a little bit here in college. And I think they're going to be really interesting. It was my first season win total that cashed was Vanderbilt over 2 games or something. It was ridiculously easy to hit that. Yeah, and then now you have, them sitting at 5.5, but juice to the under because they're in the SEC, and I think everyone's going to take them seriously now. So it's just going to be fun to see what the SEC brings us. Let's move on to the Big 12. Big 12 is an interesting conference too, as they represented a team in the playoffs that we loved at the end of the season. But I think you have something fun for us here in the Big 12, Josh.
I do, and I'll just start with the betting menu for the Big 12 futures. I believe, and the odds will reflect this as well, I think this is a wide open league. You have multiple teams that are all priced really accordingly, with Arizona State, Kansas State, Texas Tech, Baylor, BYU, Kansas, Utah, all relatively in arm's length to win the conference according to the prices. And I just think that there's a lot of parity in this league. I feel that, you look at you mentioned the on three numbers. They've got Texas Tech as the number 1 rated transfer grade team in FBS with all of the people that they brought in. And Baylor's up there, Utah's up there. There's a lot of teams in this ranking that are really highly regarded for what they did in the portal. And the league overall is going to be really wide open. You're going to have it's only going to take 1 or 2 players that are added at the right level to really impact your team one way or another, whether you get the guy or you don't. So I think it's going to be a really fun league. We've got Scott Frost coming back to the Big 12 at UCF. We've got Rich Rod coming back to the Big 12 with West Virginia. So we'll have some familiar faces back in this league, which will be really an interesting dynamic for some of these teams. I really think that there was some value in Utah. I bet Utah to win the Big 12 at 18-1. I went back for a little more at 14-1. It's come down almost everywhere to plus 700 or plus 900. But I think that Devin Dampier and what he adds with the running element at quarterback at Utah is really going to be something that they're going to be able to maximize. I like the additional adds that they had. They signed some guys on defense, a couple guys on the defensive line, and they got 2 corners that were highly touted that'll really help shore up the defense. And I think Utah could be in for a bounce back season. I think that they really underwhelmed and underperformed last year. They were pushed around, which is uncharacteristic of a Kyle Whittingham team to be pushed around in the trenches. I think that you'll see Utah in the trenches on the offensive and defensive lines look much, much better. They've got 4 redshirt seniors on the O-line and a 4th-year junior. There's continuity there. Set to have a big that running game could be electric. I think we'll see. And the schedule, the last thing I'll say too with Utah is that the schedule is such that while they don't avoid some of the tougher teams, they do host Texas Tech, they host Arizona State, and they also host Kansas State too. So they'll have some of those games at home. And Rice-Eccles has historically been a really tough place to go in and win. I know last year, again, kind of a down year for the Utes, but I think that Utah is one of those teams that could really jump up there and surprise. As we saw Arizona State last year, what was their preseason? 100-1 to win the league, and they shot right up there after they got on a roll. So that was really fun for you and I to ride them. I remember we saw that a little bit earlier than many.
We certainly did, and part of it was scheduling for Arizona State, getting teams at the right time and having Scadaboo and all that. But I think you agree. They got a little bit fortunate in some of those situations. Don't get me wrong. I think Dillingham's a fantastic coach. But, in my opinion, last year they were not the best team in the Big 12. They were the most fortunate. And I also agree with you that Texas Tech is on my fade list this year. I am not buying them. I think the transfer portal is good for some things, but when you're going to make such a jump like that just from the transfer portal, it is a massive overreaction, in my opinion. And so I 100% agree with the Utah, and I do love the way they finished their season with that big win at UCF, with that home stand against Iowa State, with literally nobody quarterbacking this team. They really showed a lot of heart, and they're going to get back to where they should be. And, they kind of remind me of those old Badger teams that were just almost good enough to be playing with the big dogs. Not quite there, but, if Whittingham gets them back to that, I think it's, all sails up for them. And now that you have a 12-team playoff, they could be a little dark horse here to get in the playoff at some good plus money. If you want to bet that. And if you remember, that market was messed up last year. And I think Devin Dampier is the perfect solution for this team. I do want to add one thing. I truly believe Baylor was the best team last year in the Big 12. I might be betting them as well. And I'm thinking about it. I do want like 2 Big 12 bets to win the championship. And hell, if they can play Utah, which I do agree with you, I think I just took Utah, 8-1, 10-1, something like that. I think you got a better number at 12-1. I have to relook at what I have. I might just match them up with Baylor because Baylor ranks 11th in Bill Connelly's returning production, returning 72% of their offensive production. They returned 65% of their defensive production. It's a team that didn't really get completely torched by the transfer portal because, well, they do have some money at Baylor. They're spending it wisely. Dave Aranda was very, very, very motivated last year to keep his job. This Baylor team should have beat Colorado, and that Hail Mary just obviously destroyed them. But they might have been the team that could have represented the Big 12. So I'm looking into Baylor a little bit. They have a decent season win total out there of 7.5. Their non-conference is a little bit tricky, as they will have an SEC team, and I believe it is Auburn who's on the way up a little bit. They also have a couple easy non-conference teams as well there for Baylor. So I'd have to pull up their schedule, but I think Baylor is another.
Yeah, I've actually got it here. So, yeah, they do. They host Auburn and then at SMU, which is the tricky one I think you were referencing, and then they host FCS right. Samford. So, yeah, definitely, certainly navigatable. I think you end up 2-1 there. You feel pretty good with where you're at.
Absolutely, and it's all about winning the Big 12 because that's going to get them into the playoffs, right? So you have to remember that looking at the non-conference schedule is not as big when it's going to be a league that's only representing one team. I think that's very important, and I think the market's going to get that wrong once the playoff odds come out. So pay attention to the playoff odds when they come out because they're going to say, oh, they have to play SMU and Auburn, their chances are bad to make it playoffs. No, that has nothing to do with it because they ain't making the playoffs unless they win the Big 12 anyway. And the conference schedule is what's going to set them up to get in that championship game. So that's going to be key when it comes to attacking these odds.
One last thing I'll say, I'm glad you brought that up because if you look at the schedule, and I do like what Baylor returns, 18 overall returning starters. They return all 5 on the offensive line. Quarterback Sawyer Robinson's coming back. I think that Baylor will be a lot more explosive offensively, and you'll see a lot more consistent performance from them. But the conference road games are all winnable. At Oklahoma State, at TCU, at Cincinnati, at Arizona. You're going to have a Baylor team that will certainly – none of those games are without reach. So I think, Baylor should, as long as you avoid injury and you play with consistency as you'd expect this team to play, I think the schedule aligns well for them to also be able to play meaningful football at the end of November.
Oh, man, love it. Let's go, man. I'm ready for college football now, dude. Oh, we have to wait this whole summer. Are you kidding me? Well, here we are, man. Group of 5. You made an interesting comment to me that maybe it's a little bit sad about the Group of 5 this year, and I'll let you go ahead and tell the audience what you said. But definitely, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, so a couple of things that I was looking at with the Group of 5. Again, very limited markets. There's only 1 or 2 books that have conference futures up on the Group of 5, and so we won't destroy those markets today. But there's been a lot of coaching carousel in the group of five. You look at Bowling Green hiring Eddie George. Tim Albin went from Ohio to Charlotte. Zach Kitley went to Florida Atlantic from WKU. Just team after team after Utah State, Temple, Tulsa, they all have new coaches. There's tons of coaching turnover, and the portal has been very, very unkind to the group of five level. You can look all over America at teams like South Alabama, Jacksonville State, Charlotte, Kent State, teams that are already, some of these teams were already bad, and they're just getting completely dissected in the portal. So what's happening is you have talent that stands out that is now moving on to the Power 5 level. And in order to backfill, these teams are having to reach into the FCS ranks. And they're not hitting North Dakota State, South Dakota State, and Montana State. They're reaching at Gardner-Webb and Campbell and Mercer and teams like that. And so you're really getting fringe players to backfill your roster. And what that creates is it creates a wider gap in talent between the G5 and the Power 5. Again, one of those reasons I'm going to look at spreads in weeks 1, 2, and 3, and some of it might be it's kind of atypical for what I've done in the past, as I usually try to spot feisty dogs and back them gobbling up all those points. But it might be one of those things this year where they can't set some of these spreads high enough because the talent gap is going to be quite remarkable this year. And it is sad to see, because you're seeing that the P5, their plan all along was potentially to break off and separate, and that might be closer to reality than you and I would like.
Absolutely, man. Just getting completely hacked by the transfers is killing some of these smaller schools. And it's interesting how you said, where to concentrate, because, the northern part of the United States, they kind of just keep to themselves a little bit, and you see draft picks coming from them. Just another first-round pick from North Dakota State this year, right? I find that amazing, seeing that. You got some Montana State guys that get drafted as well. Oh, they were fun. And this group of five is interesting. My thoughts are, Boise State, really. It's funny how they return so much production, and they tend to keep a lot of guys there. I feel like when it comes to college football playoffs, the teams that are going to get the least, destroyed on that is the ones that are stuck in the middle of nowhere, kind of like Boise State, because they recruit from like a large amount of, let's say, range, a large radius, yet it's not like these kids want to go that far from home. Now, if you're like a Virginia team, like a James Madison or something, you'll go to the Virginia Techs and stuff like that, but not necessarily if you're Boise State and you're just a fringe guy that's, 4-star-ish. You might stay with Boise because you can get drafted at Boise, which they've proven many times, and you're going to look dang good. Just asking Genty when he ran through some of the worst defenses that I've seen in the history of college football. I think Boise State might have some value when the playoffs odds come out because of it, and they're going to pick one again. I don't see why it wouldn't be them unless somebody beats them. It's like UNLV took the hit losing their coach to Purdue, but I'm also looking at Liberty a little bit, and maybe they don't get in because their conference is going to be so easy, but if everybody else has 2 losses, they might just have to go in by default because they're going to have that whole Coastal Carolina type situation. Oh, we're undefeated. One of those types of teams that thought they should make the college football playoffs. There's the name is they beat Auburn in the bowl. Was that Coastal? Can't remember who that was offhand. That's how detached my brain is from football right now.
Yeah, are you talking about? You're not talking about the UCF team, are you?
Yes, I am. Yes, UCF. Now that UCF's Big 12, it made me totally forget that they were a group of 5. Yes, because UCF got screwed before. So thank you. But Liberty's interesting to me. They return a ton of production. Now they lost Salter, obviously, to Colorado. But Ethan Vasco is coming in from Coastal Carolina, who did okay. He didn't have a lot to work with last year. He did pretty good at the end. But, if this team, this is a team that has a lot of money, and they have a lot of backing there. And I think that, they could be that team that does go undefeated. So maybe look for their season win total over. And maybe you do take a little bite out of them to make the college football playoffs. It's just in case we run out of teams. Now would I agree with taking a 2-loss Boise State over Liberty? Maybe not as far as strength, but as far as deserving, that can go a lot of different ways. So Liberty's just one I'm going to keep my eyes on, but I haven't made a bet yet.
Yeah, and I think regarding Liberty as well, you look at the other contenders in that league, primarily Western Kentucky and Jacksonville State taking a step back. So it's going to take a team like Louisiana Tech or Middle Tennessee to really step up and surprise people. And I just don't know if those teams can make a big enough jump. It would require Liberty likely losing twice in conference play, which, again, I'm not sure based on what they return and who they've brought in that's necessarily something that we're going to see. So, yeah, I mean, at this point, too, it looks like the path will likely be set for Liberty if they're able to run the table. And, that's kind of what people thought they were going to do last year, too. And it was far from it with some of the shocking losses that they had in their in their conference slate. So just one of those interesting things with Liberty. But you are right about the fact that they've got a lot of money there in Lynchburg and they spend it. And they're really motivated to see their football team do really well. So it'll be real interesting when those markets emerge for teams to make the playoff, yes or no. You and I talked about that last year in the offseason, and there was a lot of value in and low risk value as well. And I think one of the teams that you really keyed in on was Penn State. It was kind of just a no-brainer for them to make the playoff. At worst, they were going to finish third in the Big Ten, which they
Indiana.
That. And Indiana too. Yeah, I think you had them at some massive number, which was wild.
Yeah, that was my big one last year at 200-1. And I think the market just didn't know how to price it at the time. And it's funny how little it dropped. It did drop eventually. I did kind of come to 100-1, 60-1. Maybe there's still some books that were at 200-1. I did see a 500-1, but it wasn't a book that I could bet. But Indiana was a diamond in the rough, and that's what you got to look for, because I still think at the beginning of these prices coming out, the market's going to understand it more, but the line and the odds makers are not, and that's why I think that the teams like the Utahs, the Baylors, the Georgia Techs even might be an okay play at a massive price. You're not going to get 200-1. That ship has definitely sailed. But hell, a 50-1 on a team. And here's another thing: if you see odds to win the Big 12 conference, and it's like 10-1, and then you're like 20-1 to make the playoffs, you know something is wrong there, right? You know that, yeah. I would much rather bet them to make the playoffs, because if they win the Big 12 championship game, they're going to the playoffs. You might see some screw ups like that, because it was absolutely insane looking at that market last year. So I'm so excited for that market to come up. And we'll be texting me and you as soon as that happens, my friend. We talked about Utah. Is there any other early bets that you made, or should we just take a quick peek at the Heisman odds?
Let's do both. One other one I looked at was, I really like what Fresno State has done in the portal, and I love their coaching hire. Fresno State plucked Matt Entz from USC, where he was an associate defensive head coach, and prior to that, he was the head coach at North Dakota State, where he was 61-11 overall over 5 seasons. He spent the last 5 seasons before that as the defensive coordinator for NDSU. But in my opinion, they hit home runs with their coordinators, Josh Davis from the University of South Dakota and Nick Benedetto, who was at Northern Illinois as their defensive coordinator, had some really good defenses at Northern Illinois. I think the coaching staff that they're compiling at Fresno State has been really impressive to me. They added E.J. Warner, who quarterbacked at Rice and Temple, Kurt Warner's son.
Yeah.
And I think he'll do just fine in the Mountain West, being able to kind of carve up some of those softer pass defenses. The other thing, too, is Entz is going to run the ball, and Fresno State has typically had physical running games in the past. They're going to get back to that a little bit this year. And when you look at the way that the conference schedule sets up for Fresno State, they do play quite a few teams that have just Charmin soft run defenses. I won't get completely into the weeds on all of it, but you look at Nevada, San Diego State, even Boise State, for as good as their team was, their defense was super soft and had many holes at times, which was really concerning. Utah State, San Jose State. I mean, there's just a lot of those teams that have really, really weak run defenses and teams that have been decimated in the portal. So I think when you're looking at teams to win the league, with the transfer ads, with the coaching staff that's being compiled, kind of a rebound year for Fresno State, I think that they will find themselves in position to be playing meaningful football late into their conference schedule. So I did take some 9-1 on Fresno State and put in a little play on them.
Well, there you go. Fresno State sitting at 9-1, the fourth favorite behind UNLV and San Jose State, which I do agree with them being the more of the value. Because Boise, you're laying juice minus 125. UNLV plus 400. Yeah, they lost their coach, right? Come on. San Jose State, they're a lot of trickery on their side last year. Their defense was terrible. You saw them choke that lead away against Boise State, and that kind of killed me because I had plus 22. They're up by like 14 to 22 points themselves, and somehow give up like 35 unanswered points. That one I remember too well last year, and that was the most brutal. And of course, they just have to just throw the pick six or whatever it was at the end to christen that non-cover. At first you're thinking about your money line play, and last year, like seriously, yeah, a little smoke and mirrors in my opinion with San Jose State. So I do agree with you. Fresno State has more of the value. I am going to share my screen here so I can just kind of put up some of these odds here for Heisman for anybody that's watching rather than listening on the podcast as it comes out tomorrow morning. Awards, Heisman. That's the only one that's out this year. Archie Manning, 7-1. Garrett Nussmeier, 9-1. Drew Allard, which I completely disagree with being third, but 10-1. Clay Klubnik from Clemson, 14-1. Jeremiah Smith. Now we're starting to talk about receivers at 14-1. Julian Sayin from Ohio State is at 15-1. So any initial thoughts? I haven't made a bet myself, but I do have a thought on a couple of these.
I mean, more and more, it just seems like it's a quarterback award. So, I mean, it's really going to be what is a receiver or a running back going to have to do in order to unless they do what Ashton Genty does last year at Boise State, breaking records and just running for 225 yards a game, which we may see.
Or play both ways. Or play both ways like Hunter, right? Yeah, that's
or play both ways like Hunter. It's just kind of one of those things where it's going to take either a really unique talent, which maybe we have, maybe we don't have, or seems to just be a kind of a quarterback-driven award. So I don't know. It's so hard too because are you even really getting a lot of value at the top? I mean, Nussmeier, Arch Manning, Klubnik, they're all Julian Sayin, they're all really solid players, but the odds just are not long enough necessarily to try to give yourself any outs later on in the year when you're trying to figure out the three finalists that are going to end up there. It wouldn't terribly surprise me if a guy like John Mateer at Oklahoma has a really big year and kind of explodes onto the scene. Also, Gio Lopez, you and I know him from his days at South Alabama. If you're looking for something that's kind of a long shot, I mean, he's a guy who could probably tear up the ACC and start to build a little bit of momentum for that. Again, I don't know necessarily that a player like that is going to shoot up and win it. I don't really recall the last time that we've had a player that's kind of come out of nowhere in the offseason and build that sort of momentum. So, yeah, I think it's a tough market, the Heisman market for trying to necessarily call who's going to win it. I mean, Gunnar Stockton at Georgia, he could have a really, really good year, but the way that Georgia plays football, I don't think that the numbers will be there for him to be provided some serious consideration. So, gosh, I don't know at this point if there's anything that I am absolutely in love with. How about you?
Oh man, I agree with everything you said there. It's funny. It's like it's hard to pick a team that has a good defense because it's all about numbers, as you know. Especially when Daniels won the year before, and then Caleb won the year before. It's like these teams with no defenses are the ones winning. So how are you going to give it to Julian Sayin when he might not even play most of the fourth quarters? How are you going to give it to Jeremiah Smith, who might be the best player in college football, which he might have been the best player last year, to be honest with you, as a freshman. But he's 14-1 there, and he's going to be sitting waiting for the playoffs, right? It's you have to almost approach like that. I would if I had to look at a receiver, I'd look at Ryan Williams from Alabama at 30-1 because maybe they don't have enough defense, like, as of late with Kalen DeBoer and that type of team. Maybe he's getting a ton of pass catches, and maybe that helps him thwart him up towards the Heisman. But then obviously you got to think of the quarterback that's throwing to him, and Ty Simpson. I think you might just have to once again look at the Big 12 or the ACC, because these teams are going to rely on points. We did mention we like Georgia Tech. We did mention we liked Baylor a little bit, Utah, and you got some of those guys, sitting at 50-1, and that's maybe a thought to look at. It's kind of hard if you're liking them to make the playoffs, and then you're gonna have to bet on the Heisman. Of course, you're getting the much bigger odds, but no, I'm going to try to find the team, I guess, that is going to have a lot of offense, and it's going to go against a lot of bad defenses. I thought Ashton Genty was a perfect player last year to win the Heisman. Unfortunately, it just happened to go against a unicorn in Travis Hunter, at Colorado. Yeah. It's just bad luck for people that bet him, right? And so, but that's what you're looking for here. Probably not going to find it in the SEC or the Big Ten. I think it's going to just be this quarterback that pops up. Maybe it's Miller Moss from Louisville, because they got that Jeff Brom offense. But it's fun to talk about, and I guess maybe if I do have to talk ACC, maybe Joey Aguilar, that's switched spots with Iamaleava from UCLA to Tennessee. Maybe it's him that has the chip on his shoulder to show how good he is. And he's got Josh Heupel, who manufactures NFL quarterbacks apparently, because he's gotten both his quarterbacks in the NFL with his style of offense. That's one that I would consider as well, Josh.
Yeah, I had Joey Aguilar written down at plus 4,500 at FanDuel. I saw that one earlier in the day. What do you got there? 50-1?
51.
Yeah, so I mean that's where you'd want to play it. But that's another quarterback who really can play. And a lot of people don't know him yet, but he'll really surprise some people this year. And the other thing too is you can find a quarterback like Dampier from Utah or Haynes King, where they're going to be called on to have a lot of the load put on their shoulders, and they're going to run the ball. They're going to be throwing the ball around, and they're going to be called for those offenses to have success, for the quarterback to be the driver of that. And so those are certainly players that I would like to single out. You look at a guy like Dylan Raiola at Nebraska, a great talent and a great quarterback, but with the way that they play football and the conservative nature that we've seen from Matt Rule week in and week out during the second half, I just don't think he's going to have the stats to be under serious consideration. So it's hard to bet a player like that when they're really up against it from their coaching style.
Absolutely. I'm looking at, and I was wrong, not 50-1, 100-1 on Sawyer Robinson, as well as Haynes King. Both of them are 100-1 right now on DraftKings. That Haynes King one is so interesting to me at 100-1. And I know Ward was there and he almost won it last year, but it's just an interesting to see Haynes King right there, where he could have one of those, like you said, types of years. And I'm looking at Diego Pavia at 200-1. It's like, what's funny is that he probably was the most valuable to a team, but he didn't win it, because he was the whole team last year, I feel.
Well, I totally agree about Diego Pavia, and it's interesting because the transfer portal allows for this nucleus of players that come from different schools to really have an impact. But my goodness, are they going to give the Heisman to a team that quarterbacks a 6-6 program? I just don't know if that's part of it too, is how your team performs on the field.
Absolutely, and that's why they should change it to most outstanding player, because the most valuable player to a team is not always the one that wins this award, even though they call it the MVP, right? We've had this discussion many times, and Pavia, that's why his odds are 200-1. The odds makers know that. They're trying to bait you into playing it. I doubt that that's the correct play at 200-1, but I know what the correct play is. That's checking out Step on a Duck 1 on Twitter, checking out Joshua Nunn, who's doing all the work for us right now in college football. Joshua, could you tell our listeners and viewers where they can find your wonderful information and plays for this season?
Yeah, so I'm a writer for the Action Network. I do 10 to 12 write-ups weekly over there, and I'll be starting to do some additional content with the Action Network. do write-ups for covers.com and Capping the Game, and here on Twitter as well, posting my thoughts and engaging in the conversation there. And then really hit the podcast circuit pretty hard last season, so I'll plan to continue that again. I love being on your show here with the Odds Breakers. There was about 7 podcasts that I appeared on routinely, so I'll be on that work as well, which we tweet links out to. But there's certainly a lot of ways to find what I'm doing, and we're building a great community of people who live and breathe this great sport. So excited to be a part of it for sure.
Absolutely. Make sure you guys check out Josh on X at StepOnTheDuck1. Josh will be tweeting all through the summer.
Yep, we'll see you at the window, Kiev. Thanks.